I'm Sue Morgan, Executive Director and Acting Joint CE at Design Council. For the second year running, we're really pleased to be headline sponsors for the Festival of Place and the Pineapple Awards. Our experience in research shows that well-designed neighbourhoods and places have a transformative impact. The spaces between buildings, the blue and the green in the grey, creating fantastic places to live. This is why we are pleased and excited to sponsor the awards for excellent placemaking and place design at the Pineapple Awards this year. Please join us to celebrate the role design can play in helping us live more happy, healthier and sustainable lives.
Hello and welcome to the Pineapple Awards for the second half of the judging of the Place in Progress category. My name is Christine Murray and I'm the founding editor-in-chief of The Developer and founding director of the Festival of Place. The Pineapples are all about celebrating best practice. Awards are a really great way to celebrate the realization of great places, and we're grateful to the Design Council who have sponsored these awards since their inception and continue to support us this year, helping to shape some of our judging criteria and some of our processes too. These awards are about the quality of the spaces created between the buildings and success from the citizen, resident, tenant, and customer point of view. That sometimes has to do with the mix of spaces that created the atmosphere, and the pineapple, given that it's a traditional architectural symbol of welcome in the UK, something that we believe great places should be is welcoming. So all of these projects are vying for the Golden Pineapple Trophy, and they are judged in 2 or 3 parts depending on the category, which involves reviewing the application submitted for the award, visiting the sites, and the final stage is the live presentation to the judges, where they have the opportunity to ask candidates about their ambitions for the project. And then after that, the judges will make their deliberations, and the winners will be announced on the 13th of November at 3:30 as part of the Festival of Place program. The finalists have 10 minutes to present their project, and that's going to be followed by 10 minutes Q&A with the judges. And today we're going to hear presentations from Climate Innovation District with Jonathan Wilson, Development Director at Citu, Greenford Quay with Sandy Morrison, partner, and Amy Whittingham, Senior Chartered Landscape Architect from HTA Design, and KAMPUS with Adam Higgins, the developer from Capital and Centric. So our judging panel today is Catherine Dewar, Regional Director, Northwest from Historic England, Francis Gannon, partner at Make Architects, and Julian Tullist, the head of master planning at Quintain. So without further ado, I am going to invite Jonathan Wilson to join me on the stage. Perfect, looks good. So yeah. I'm going to go now. Best of luck.
Thank you.
See you in 9 minutes.
Super. I'll set us off. So hello, I'm Jonathan Wilson from Citu. We're a property developer based in Leeds, and today I'll be presenting the Climate Innovation District, which is our flagship project here in Leeds. I have to start every presentation by being really clear about our purpose as a business. We're a purpose-led business here to help accelerate the transition to zero carbon cities. We relish change. Change is at the heart of everything in which we do, and we enjoy a challenge. The Climate Innovation District was certainly that when we took ownership of the site. This number 1 over onto the right hand side of your screen. We took control of the site in 2015 with buying the first parcel, which you can see identified by number 1. The Climate Innovation District, as we see it today, which is everything in colour, is approximately 22 acres. We've bundled together 3 separate bits of land over the course of the last 6 years, With now we have we've commenced on phase 1, and the wider scheme now incorporates over 850 new homes into the south bank of Leeds city centre. To give some level of context, we're about 15 minutes from the train station. Alongside those homes, really importantly, from creating amazing places that are going to change and improve the city, we include a school, a care home, about 30,000 square foot of leisure, and about 50,000 square foot of office, which includes our new headquarters, which are going to be a centre of excellence for climate change and innovation. We do enjoy a challenge, and when we took this piece of brownfield land on the edge of the city centre, there were certainly critics, both in and outside of Leeds, who wondered what on earth we were doing in effectively an old industrial part of the city. We have, over the course of the last 6 years, really elevated the status of this area, and further regeneration is now, we're happy to say, happening in and around the area, which has been a direct result of these plans, and they're no longer aspirational plans. They're plans that are very much on track and in track. You'll see on the bottom of the screen that with the solar panels, that is our manufacturing facility that we designed our own to Passive House standard system back in 2015, and we now deliver all our homes from that manufacturing facility. The facility is fundamental to the district because it opens a level of transparency for how homes are built. It will remain there as part of the district for the foreseeable future, and now has our offices and centre of excellence for climate change attached. So these are the first phase 1. I don't know whether you can see my mouse, but in the distance, we'll come on to some better images. We started on site about 2 years ago. We're now about 55 homes into the development, and we've also built our offices. These were the first family houses and first houses brought back into Leeds City Centre for 95 years. We also believe that other than a few relatively smaller developments, this is the first time in which the built environment has connected with the watercourse back into the city centre from an architectural and place perspective. We have some very clear principles here at Citu. We are trying to develop a housing development, but more importantly, the place. The place has been built to not be the status quo. We've removed barriers where possible, so people can get to know their neighbour. We remove cars from landscape, and we actually, the main reason for doing this is, one, so your car doesn't become the fundamental showpiece of your home, but secondly, to change behaviours and to start to encourage people to use sustainable methods of transportation, particularly when within the city centre boundary. We see ourselves as rule breakers, but I guess more importantly is rule makers when it comes to landscape and design. So the image you'll see in the top left-hand corner is a green road that will track emergency vehicles. As I'm sure you can imagine, the conversations we had with our highways colleagues in Leeds at the beginning were absolutely no way. And we really enjoyed that challenge to challenge the status quo and look at how we can include functional parts of the landscape, but do that in a way where it benefits wildlife, habitat, etc. We I guess by removing the barriers and the fences, and as I'm sure you'll all be aware, if you ask people what they want from their home, they will often say a car outside it and a big fence to delineate what's mine, so I can see a box within a box with a box outside it. And we've really taken a lot of lessons from one of our developments in Sheffield called Little Kelham. And we brought a lot of those ideas along here into Leeds, and it's only doable if, number one, you're very clear with the customer at the beginning, and two, you design the place to enable that. I've put in people into the middle of this into the middle of this presentation, not because it's a thing that is sandwiched. The single most important part of this development is now that we have an emerging, fantastic community who are starting to take ownership of their place. We set the development up as a community interest company from day one to enable this behaviour. I myself have moved into the district, and it's been a real joy to watch. The design is fantastic, but unless you've got people who are embracing that design and using the spaces and the spaces in between the buildings, I don't believe that you could honestly say that it has or is a success. But we've seen that, and certainly over lockdown and the times we've seen over the last few months, we've seen the value of the place that we created through people. As I said, we're about 50 homes through the development. We now, on the bottom part of the screen, you'll see a delineated part of the site. We're building some 6-7 story apartments that will help to create a more diverse community. So there'll be 1-2 bedrooms. We've put our social housing peppered around the apartment block, and we start on the phase you can see in the top of the screen where our bridge lands. The minute left, the bridge we put in very early on in the development, and this was a fundamental part of the regeneration of not only our 22 acres, but also the communities that sit on the edge of the city centre that had been disconnected by predominantly roads. So a good stat with this bridge is that the community of Cross Green that sit on the on the north of the site are able to access the new high school put into the city centre by a reduction of 11 crossings of 11 different roads. So fundamental part of this has been the inclusion of these connections that take us seamlessly into the city without the need for cars. Finally, to wrap up the future of the development, we will continue building the houses and apartments, but to add as an ancillary to this is we've got a planning application, full application has gone in and is likely to be successful in the coming months, of a multi-generational building that includes a 2-form entry primary school, 70-bed care home and facility, along with, on the top of there, some apartments. We believe it's the first multi-generational building to include all 3 of those generations within one building setting in the world, and we're very proud to continue with this development. Thank you. Hopefully I was just on time.
I heard your alarm, so you were slightly after. But that's great. Can I ask you to unshare your screen, Jonathan, and our judges are going to appear.
Sure.
Great. Julian, since you're here first, would you like to kick us off?
Jonathan, thank you very much. It's always a brave move to move into the place which you are in the process of creating. So I hope your neighbours know what you do for a living, sort of thing. It's interesting. We've just seen a presentation about Milton Keynes, where unfortunately 60% of the questions are all about the cars, and you've made a clear statement about what you're doing with them. Can I just ask where you have put them?
Yeah, the way the site is, that aerial shot you saw earlier, the cars sit beneath in an underground podium, so the houses sit up on top of on top of a podium, thankfully out of sight, that I guess consciously and subconsciously it starts to change people's behaviour.
Can I ask Catherine to come in?
Sure. Yeah, thank you. Jonathan, you mentioned that you set up as a community interest company, and that's really interesting. Can you tell us a bit more about why and how your residents, if they do, contribute towards that kick?
Yeah. So the whole site is set up as a community interest company, and when you buy a house, you get an equal share whether you have an apartment or a house, and you pay effectively a £3,000 bond when you move in. The reason we did this is so we believe that the ingredients to create a great place is about not having having a transient community. It's about ownership and responsibility, and we could have very easily sold on the freeholds. The houses are all on 999-year leaseholds, but this was about ownership and responsibility. And the way in which it works is that the community interest company will then, when we as Citu leave site, they will then manage their place. They maintain control of every aspect of the development. The way we bring data, water, power into site is that we bring one feed of data, one feed of power, and the PV on site will then feed into the private wire network, which then actually gives the community interest company it gives them an income on an annual basis as well, because the data comes in at approximately, let's say, £7 a house, and then the community interest company is able to sell it to the homeowner for £20 a house, and that income will stay within the community interest companies to reduce cost, ultimately.
Frances, do you have any questions?
I do. I have two questions. I think the density is really interesting. So you've started with the 3-storey family houses, and then I can see in the background there are existing apartment blocks that are much, much taller, neighbouring. And then in your overall view, you have plans to build a taller apartment building. You know, you have the 6 to 7-storey block coming, and then across the bridge you have a much taller block, but then there's still some small houses next door. So I wondered how you are balancing density. Why, you know, could you go taller everywhere? And did you feel it was important to start with individual family homes as maybe the you know, a solid way of kind of building that responsibility and sense of community at the beginning? My second question, is it going to be called Climate Innovation District forever? Is that a long-term, hey, I live in the Climate Innovation District? No, what's your naming thought?
Yeah, can you just remind me the first question, please, Frances?
The approach to density. You've chosen to build lower than neighbouring buildings.
Yeah.
So density, why family homes first?
Yeah.
And why shorter?
Yeah. So I guess if we start with why the family homes, I think it was Leeds has been flooded in its history of certainly the last 20 years with apartment blocks. It hasn't necessarily been flooded with we only sell to owner occupiers, so it hasn't been flooded with that. But we thought that it was important to firstly prove the model. Second, we just designed our timber frame system and opened up the factory. So on a site that big, very elongated, we had to start somewhere, and we thought it was important to start with the more valuable part of the site, which doesn't make commercial sense necessarily on an appraisal, but from a place point of view, it did make sense to bring to life the asset, which was the river. And also we felt that it was going to bring in the most diverse group of people to kick off that community. Density is a really interesting point. In Leeds, to build homes and houses, you need to be 21 metres apart we've currently got them at 9 meters apart here in the Climate Innovation District, and really we have to do that. We have to sort of balance density, human scale, architecture and placemaking with an appraisal, of course. The site originally had planning for 1,100 units on. We're delivering 313. But to do that, we did have to create a level of density that that we thought was acceptable. And you know, we travelled Sweden, Germany, great examples in Freiburg, etc., Malmo, of where density can work in this way. We make mistakes, and I think one of the reference to the building opposite on phase 2, in hindsight, that application went in about 3 years ago, and we're currently revising that, so it's actually going to be a bit lower. Again, dropping it down and probably taking it up to the road on the other side of the site to try and marry up some of the density questions that have come up over the course of the last 2 years once we've started building family housing. Thirdly, Climate Innovation District. I think we were sat in this very room about 5 or 6 years ago when we were looking at this land, and like I said, we had some people who had lots of question marks on what we're doing, and one of our values as a business is about being bold, and we set the name Climate Innovation District to be bold, to make sure that every decision we made was protecting the climate, was innovative where possible, and most importantly, it was creating a new district in the city. It has stuck. There has been no amazing marketing strategy to make it do so. It's been picked up by the city. They reference it on a regular basis, and residents do refer to it as living within the Climate Innovation District, on Secret Garden in the Climate Innovation District. So we're going to let the people decide whether it goes or stays, I think, is the answer to that.
Well, I was lucky enough to visit, so I'm going to take the chair's prerogative and just ask a question as well about, in terms of the use of prefabrication or the cassettes that from the factory. Is there something you've learned through that process? I mean, are they working as intended in terms of the construction? Are you pleased with the way that construction process is going, or is there something, I don't know, unintended or a lessons used? I mean, are the residents fascinated by it?
Yeah, I mean, our system has been rationalised and simplified. It meets passive house standards. I think from the manufacturing of the system has been is improving on a daily basis, and actually that's probably not one of our biggest challenges in our vertically integrated delivery model. The performance of the homes has been our biggest success on the development, in a sense that we're tracking the performance of the homes. As I said, I'm lucky enough to live in one of the homes, and I haven't yet put any form of heating on within the house. The air tightness and the MVHR system redistributing the heat across the house has kept it more than comfortable. I was away last week in Scotland for a week, and I thought I might come back with the MVHR not having any significant use to a very cold house, and I came back and it was 21 degrees. So the system itself, through from production to in use, has been a real success. We will hold our hands up in the past at our Sheffield development where things haven't gone to plan. Back in maybe 2015-16, we've had to go back and retrofit details and fix MVHR systems and replace MVHR systems. I think this is the product of a lot of continuous improvement and learning, hard learning. And so, yeah, it's so far, touch wood, so good.
Thanks, that's our time. So just a big thank you for entering the pineapples and for your presentation. And judges, if you want to turn your camera off, I'm going to invite our next presentation to join us.
No worries.
So thanks, Jonathan.
Yeah.
So next up, we've got Sandy and Amy from HTA Design. I'm just going to invite you to join us.
Thank you. Thanks very much for your time. We'll just talk you through the place in progress at Greenford Quay. This is an image of the first building and indeed the main feature of the site, which is the canal which runs across the site. If you move on to the next slide, Amy. So Greenford Quay is 1,965 new homes, some built to rent, some affordable homes, and some sale homes. It was the first project outside of America for an organisation called Greystar, who manage build to rent housing around the world now and have about 400,000 homes that they're managing. And this was the biggest project they'd ever done, and we did it as one detailed planning application for the whole thing. The idea from the very beginning was that if you wanted people to come and live somewhere which was a little bit off the beaten track, then you had to make a fantastic public realm and a great environment for them to live in. The idea really is that a great neighbourhood is a more appealing thing than a great building. So start from making the great neighbourhood, which is what we attempted to do. If you move on. So the site had been derelict for about 10 years. Its entire history had been as a factory site, previously the headquarters in the UK of GlaxoSmithKline. It's the site, in order to walk round the site previously, would have taken you getting on for 10 minutes really to walk around the site, and no one could come into it. It was a secure area. So the opportunity that we had was the opportunity to open the place up. It had been completely disconnected from the community and also disconnected from the canal. So where the canal ran through it, you couldn't walk along it. And what we realised right from the beginning was that the opportunity was to demolish the existing buildings and, for sustainability reasons and financial reasons, keep all of the material from them on the site. That's what we wanted to do. And what that allowed us to do was sort of level off the site so that we could create level access across a bridge, a new bridge over the canal, and make step-free access from one corner of the site over to the other corner of the site. And that gave us a bit of a challenge because the levels then all came up around the canal, but that also turned out to be sort of the opportunity of the development of the main space. Amy, thank you. Most of the presentation is going to be about the landscape because we believe that people love to live next to other living things. So the focus of the scheme and the focus of the development and the place we've made so far is about the living landscape. But actually the place is working pretty hard. In order to keep the headroom under the bridge for people to be able to walk along by the canal where the bridge flew across, we needed to keep the bridge quite thin. So we tunnelled under the canal to connect the services from one side to another. We were very keen to start making a place quite quickly, so we went for modular construction, partly for the benefit of speed. So the first building that we've built in under 2 years is 379 homes in it, because we wanted people to get there. We don't want the thing to take forever. People activate the place, so let's get on and build it quickly. So that's what you're looking at there, the first modular building under construction. And then I'll hand over to Amy at this point, but what you're looking at here is the idea that the living landscape should sort of dominate everything. So there's a very large energy centre in the scheme, sort of 30 metres by about 30 metres in a double height space, but it's under the square in the middle of the development. And the only thing you see of it really is these Corten steel boxes that are coming up. But I'll pass you over to Amy to describe the landscape in more detail.
Thank you, Sandy. Yeah, so as we've already said, the whole master plan was really based around creating a sequence of complementary green spaces which maximised these sort of amazing views we had towards Grand Union Canal, and really created a sort of pedestrian-focused public realm which could provide a green backdrop for the building, but also for the community as a whole. One of our key concepts in this was really to stitch this area of Greenford back into the wider green infrastructure network and contribute towards a wider nature recovery network. You can see on the plan on the screen that there's a significant piece of green space adjacent to the site, which was called Horsenden Hill, and that's actually a sort of a green area which is equivalent to the size of Hyde Park, and we really wanted to sort of maximise connections to that green space and also along the canal. Something else which was really key to us was creating a sense of identity, and so the design of the public realm started to draw on those key assets, the canal and also the site's industrial path. So you can see in some of the pictures on the screen of the finished scheme, we really sort of focused on bold detailing and use of sort of industrial materials, a lot of timber, a lot of cortem. You can also see in the image a lot of the key spaces that we delivered. So I think one of the things to note is that there was a generous amount of public realm which was delivered with the first block in order to ground the block and also create that sense of place. So we have a civic square at the heart of the development that you can see in the top right image, which I'll talk about in more detail. We've got a new pedestrian bridge over the canal, which really sort of bridges north and south and creates that new link between the two. We've got a canal side amphitheatre and then an extensive greening throughout the master plan. And really sort of, obviously, as I said already, key to this was creating the sense of community. The site had been isolated for so long, it was important for Greystar to sort of welcome the community back into the site and create a network of green spaces which provide a real backdrop for activity. So we did this in a number of ways. Some of the early sketches we did for the Civic Square sort of looked extensively at how we could create this sort of platform for activity. For example, we did a lot of sun studies into the position of the water feature, looking at how we can maximise sun and views so we could keep children playing in there for as long as possible on a summer's day. We positioned the amphitheatre adjacent to the area where we had canal side mooring, and we have a terrace which is adjacent to one of the micro breweries that we have at the ground floor of the block itself. Then sort of some images of the completed scheme that really sort of, I think, demonstrate the way in which the block is really sort of grounded within the landscape, and the landscape provides this kind of green and biodiverse setting for the development as a whole. Throughout the scheme, we planted 390 trees. We really had a focus on planting of mature trees, which create that sense of place from day one. You can see in the image in the middle bottom, we've got a double height lobby, which is the main entrance to the block, which is called Tillerman's. And you can see sort of how we sort of used the square to sort of maximise those views and create that sense of the relationship between the inside and outside and the kind of setting that sits the block within, really. And I suppose that understanding of the importance of landscape and the creation of green spaces also extends to the approach which was taken to the internal block itself. The Greystar model is dependent on attracting but also retaining renters, and there was a focus on creating an environment which fosters community, and that was partially done by the creation of landscape spaces which allowed people to meet and get to know their neighbours. So some of the ways in which we did that was through the creation of generous communal podium courtyards within the development itself. These had pavilion structures within them which had communal kitchens that people could use with a barbecue and a table where people could sit and contribute and congregate. We had water features, we had areas of play, so really sort of trying to foster that sense of community. That approach was also seen within the communal roof terraces as well, which sit at the sort of the top of each of the blocks and provide those amazing views over the development as a whole. Over to you, Sandy.
Okay, do you want to just move on to the next one? As I say, we're looking to try to complete the development relatively quickly. So we've used off-site construction, technologically refined homes, fantastic benefits from the point of view of CO2 savings, and also vastly reduced numbers of deliveries to site. So a much better neighbour as a development, which in turn helps to foster the community's appreciation of the place we're making. And I'll rattle through the last two. We've done lots of events, so the events are partly for our own residents who are in the first building, but also for the surrounding community. So outdoor theatre, music, art, lots of things going on. If you move on to the next one. And what we're trying to do really over the next 10 years, oh, that's my alarm going off, is what we're trying to do is to finish the place off over the next 10 years. But the great thing about having done the landscape first, it's when the cinema arrives on the square and when the other people turn up and when the workspace turns up, and there'll be about 4,000 people here, the landscape will be 10 years more mature by that stage, and we think that's a fantastic thing to try to do. We're starting on the next building, which is the one which is on the right-hand side there, and we're completing the design on the one on the opposite side of the square that has the cinema in it, and we're looking at meantime uses for the office too.
Brilliant, thanks very much. If you want to unshare the screen, Amy, I'm going to invite the judges to turn their cameras on and ask their questions. Brilliant. Catherine, let's kick off with you.
Thank you for the presentation. With apartment blocks, you know, by their very nature, you have kind of single front door and less activity at ground floors of those blocks. So can you tell us a little bit about how those buildings hit the ground and how they relate to the spaces around them where you haven't got kind of commercial units at ground floor, please?
Well, the only place where we don't have commercial units at ground floor is on the west side of the development, where it'll open on to, where it was designed to open on to the school playground, which goes in next. The three sides which face public space are entirely lined with either the main entrance lobby, the secondary entrances which people can use, the terrace which faces south and overlooks the canal, that's lined up to have an organic pub coming in there. And we are currently fitting out the little co-op unit, which goes up towards the north on the street, and then on the very north side, as part of phase one, there's a nursery too. So the whole thing, the whole ground floor is active. The other thing that happens is that what we've done in the first floor is we've provided, it works out as ground floor level, is all the public car parking that the scheme will have. So the scheme has about 120 spaces for visitors coming to it, and they're all in a podium in this first building that we've designed. So they drive in from the north side of that square that we've designed. But every public side of the building is completely lined with active frontage, and that is the proposal for the master plan going forwards.
Francis, I want to bring you in now. I know this is one of the projects that you visited as well.
Yeah, it's lovely how mature the landscape is. It really feels like it's been there for a very long time, and the levels work really nicely across the canal. I didn't realise that you'd built those up quite so much, but that's makes a lovely flow. And the site is absolutely enormous. So I think it's really exciting to think of the progress that is going to happen over the next 10 years. I wondered if you could talk a bit about the community that, or the offer, you know, are these apartments all for, you know, young professional couples and it's all just very lovely and neat, you know, or is it a sort of a cradle to grave offer? You've talked about a nursery. I wondered how much variety there is in the apartment buildings, and also what the workspace offer is going to be.
So the apartments are predominantly 1 and 2 bed, some studio and some 3 bed. The aim is pretty much to be cradle to grave. We are aware though that we are surrounded by a fantastic offer of existing family housing. And we do imagine the scenario where people might come here before they have kids and then move into the existing neighbourhood. The intention is, whilst the amenities inside the buildings and the roof terrace are for the use of the residents, the sort of very deliberate objective of the amphitheatre, which is formed by the fact that we had to raise the ground level at that point by 3 metres, is to make it a sort of public place. And having invited the community back in, it was interesting, we were there, we opened it up for Doors Open Day, and loads of people came who were just neighbours who were interested to come and see what is this thing that's landed in the middle of our area. And some of them said that over the beautiful sunny weather we'd had in the summer, they had been using the amphitheatre space, because locally there, it's the first new space. You know, everything else is suburban streets of 2-storey houses. There is no public space for people to come to, and we've sort of provided that. So I think there's potentially less larger housing or less larger apartments than we might have had in another build-to-rent development, where there wasn't the immediate competition, really, of all of the existing family housing that's already there. Did that cover it?
It did. And the workplace, I'd just be interested, there's mention of some workspace.
Well, the work thing's really interesting, because this, what's happened to the world has changed people's attitude to work and play. And interestingly, it's always struck me in these build-to-rent things, and particularly when we've been working on this and the stuff we've learned, work is as important to our target market as the gym. You know, they are looking for somewhere to work in. And interestingly, some people did rent an apartment because they were setting up a business and they wanted to use the cinema room that we have to do presentations to their potential clients. So we all have the struggle of how you look smart in this new environment that you have to present yourself into. We've inadvertently done that with the cinema room, and now we're in the design of the new blocks, we're trying to be a bit more deliberate about those sorts of work spaces. And it's a mixture, it's the private space, but one of the buildings is basically a maker building, and it will have workspace on the ground floor that everyone can come down and share in that sort of model.
Julian, you have a lot of experience of creating provision for residents. I'm going to ping to you.
I was just going to say, a large build-to-rent development in a suburban context sounds familiar, Sandy and Amy. Great presentation, really good graphics, really clearly got that across. I mean, Catherine and Francis have sort of asked the questions I was going to ask, actually, is that I understand, you know, all of the construction, modern methods of construction, the volumetrics, all that sort of stuff. And you know, build-to-rent schemes have a lot of amenity, i.e. private amenity for the residents who live in the buildings. And I wasn't quite clear on how the kind of the ground floor uses worked for the wider community. And I wonder actual fact, I mean, Amy mentioned the landscape connection to Horsenden Hill. I just kind of wonder whether in actual fact in explaining the scheme, maybe there was an opportunity to explain those connections to the local sort of suburban context a bit more clearly. I'm thinking in the context of the King's Cross presentation, which we had first this morning, you know, one of the fantastic successes when they opened Greenford Square was that the local children came in and they danced in the fountains, and you know, Roger had to provide towels for them. And I just think it's probably something that was missing in an otherwise really good presentation. And I think it's an HTA design expression. Is it superbia? It is. And I just thought you should have mentioned that, actually, because Greenford Quays is adding to this suburban context.
Yeah, well, very good point. I mean, unfortunately, when you go through editing which photos you're going to use, the photos of the local kids in the dancing fountain that Amy has didn't make it to the presentation. So I totally take your point on that. The entire ground floor, other than the entrances to the buildings, is basically public. It's all public uses. So, you know, it's the cinema, the gym, it's all of those things. That's what's happening. And there is an office building which is separate as well. The existing building, which is by Wallace and Gilbert and Partners, who designed the Hoover building, it's going to be converted into office. So there's sort of workspace there. And it has obviously.
Can I just confirm that there was that question about how do the suburban neighborhoods, how are they connected into those uses?
Well, Yeah, okay. So, I mean, the intention is that it's an entirely public place. So, sorry, Amy.
So they can, just to clarify, they can
say. I'll just say something quickly. Currently,
okay.
to get from one side, or previously, to get from one side to the other side, you had to walk all the way around here, and it took you 8 minutes, basically, minimum. And it's going to take you 2 minutes to walk across. So the whole place, and changing the levels means that you can now just walk straight across or cycle straight across. And we've effectively connected the Piccadilly line tube station, which is to the north, and the Greenford Central line station, which is to the south, because you now have a diagonal connection across the canal getting to them. So I think it's difficult just now because it's a construction site, but it's all about the permeability sort of east-west and north-south. Amy?
No, I think I was just going to reiterate that really. I mean, it is set on a key desire line, and there is that diagonal route that runs through, and obviously the early installation of the bridge has really helped with sort of creating that key connection. I think it's also we're saying that it is becoming a really well-used space. There isn't anything similar in the sort of vicinity, and I think that the play offering in the local area isn't brilliant either. So we are seeing, you know, that whenever I've been to site, it's really nice to see that the local community are really sort of using the space. There's also plans in the future to sort of improve that relationship further with the community. There are sort of proposals that are being explored in terms of enhanced links to Horsenden Hill through a pontoon along the canal, but also there within the planning application there are improved connections over the road to Horsenden Hill, and also proposals for improvements to that space as a whole. And we're also looking at things like sort of community gardening schemes within some of the vacant plots that we could bring forward. There's a scheme at the moment which is being developed for a Muga within the site as well. So I think sort of those relationships and sort of building on those relationships with the community are really at the heart of what's being developed here.
Great. Oh, well, I'm afraid that's our time. So just thank you very much, Amy and Sandy, for your presentation. Judges, we've got one more. So if you want to, and if you want to turn your cameras off, I'm going to invite our next presenter to the stage, which is Adam Higgins from Capital and Centric, and he's going to be presenting Campus.
Great, thank you very much.
Best of luck.
My name is Adam Higgins. I'm the co-founder and co-owner of Capital and Centric, and Campus itself is owned jointly by Capital and Centric and another development company called HBD. A guy called Adam Brady there is my sub-opposite number. So we did it as a joint venture. We started this process probably about 2013 when Manchester Metropolitan University brought their 89 Street campus right in the heart of Manchester City Centre. They brought that to the market, looking for development partners basically to buy the site from them. We started with something which wasn't overly exciting, if you like. There were this incredible but derelict two old shipping warehouses. The one in the foreground of the picture there was completely derelict. We weren't even allowed to go in the building before we'd actually bought it. The university wouldn't let us in. And then sat just behind that, there was this great big 12-storey old former teaching block part of the university, which is kind of classic 60s architecture, which I think everybody assumed we would immediately want to pull down, I dare say, perhaps including me at times. But actually, when you stripped away, you know, from the two bigger buildings, you realise there's all these sort of hidden gems within the building itself, which we could really start to work with to try and create a really interesting place at campus. So we had these sort of amazing New York-style fire escapes on some of the older buildings. We've got this on the second picture along there. We've got this funny little old 1960s security cabin next to the canal, which is for some reason built on stilts, which I don't know why. Then we've got the tower itself, but then on the right-hand side of that picture with the tower in, we've got the old Minchell House shipping warehouse, which had this sort of weird metal cladding on the front facade of it there. We've got an old street called Little David Street, which is a cobbled street sitting in between two of the listed buildings. We've got these weird and wonderful door openings, window openings, fenestration details that we wanted to keep. And sort of lastly, we had this classic 1960s sort of colonnade type architecture that we just felt, surely we shouldn't be getting rid of that. Surely we can make a more interesting place if we can try and knit all these bits in together and create a development right in the heart of Manchester in 2.5 acres that doesn't look like it's been kind of plonked from space in one, in one fell swoop. It looks like it's been built over time, because indeed it has over many, many decades. So the next job really was to try and find an architect who would share our vision. We were quite kind of, we sort of knew what we were after, really. So we had this idea that we wanted to try and bring something a little bit kind of Scandi cool. So we approached a company, and they did have a small Manchester office, but they were based in Holland, actually, called Meccano, mainly because at the time it hadn't sort of occurred to us that Holland isn't actually in Scandinavia. But anyway, we appointed them. They had a small Manchester office, and we worked with the Manchester office really to come up with this master plan, keeping the tower, as you can see on the far end, but raising it by 3 stories to make that the sort of the focal point, if you like, from a distance, keeping the old security hut and turning that into what we call the bungalow, which we'll come back to later, keeping the 2 old listed buildings on the right-hand side, which become about 57 loft apartments, so new build apartments as well, and then this funny little sort of rooftop village that we're creating on all the new builds. So we've got some homes also within these funny little Dutch houses that we've built, which are actually clad in this sort of corrugated metal cladding, reminiscent of what was on the older building that I mentioned before. But the real key to it, apart from all the people who are going to be living there, it's a residential scheme. The real key to it for us was trying to create something that was completely unique and completely unusual for Manchester, possibly even in the UK actually, but something right in the middle, in the heart of the scheme. So we wanted to create a proper city centre garden, which just doesn't exist in the city at the moment. So amazingly, we had quite a lot of trouble finding landscape architects who were up for following our vision, because I think most people seem to want to create quite a wide space with very, very sort of either low-level planting or ideally planting around the edge. So really, you could put a Christmas market with Christmas market stalls in there, or you could put deck chairs in there because you can put a screen on there and show the football. And that wasn't our vision at all. We very much wanted to create a proper garden, a really lush green garden right in the middle of the city centre. But to give it life, we also wanted bars, restaurants and independent retailers and businesses all around this kind of central garden space to really kind of give it that vibe and give it that excitement. There are other little squares and gardens around the site as well, but I was really going to mainly concentrate on this main one. We've actually got 4 squares and gardens that we've got within the campus scheme. So this was an image that we had done a few years ago of what we wanted to create, which is completely different, as I say, to perhaps what most people thought we were going to do with a sort of an open kind of courtyard capable of being used for other things. We just wanted this space that was completely overgrown. So we've got some really big tree specimens in there, which we'll come on to in a second. And this was really the brief that we then used to get the landscape architects and everyone else kind of excited as to what we wanted to create here. And I think even to this day, this is the unique selling point, I think, for campus, as opposed to all the other residential schemes that are being built certainly within Manchester, where to some extent landscaping is perhaps almost like the thing that's thought of last, possibly. So we wanted it to be like this, and even though this CGI you'll see in a minute, it genuinely looks like this as well. When we bought the site, there were sort of 4 main entrances into what was the kind of NCP car park in the middle of the site that will then be that secret garden, one of which is shown on that picture on the left. So it was a kind of quite an austere sort of place, because it was sort of 1960s mainly. Everything was gated off. It had been empty for quite a long time. One of the buildings had been empty for 40 years. Some of them had been empty for about 10 years. It wasn't sort of hugely loved. Bits were falling off the buildings that were remaining. But fundamentally, there was just no permeability. So all the areas to the south and the east of campus itself weren't particularly well used either, because there was just no footfall passing through this 2.5 acre lump of land right in the middle of the city centre. So that image you've got on the left broadly looks like the image on the right, and it really does. I was there yesterday actually, so all those plants are in, all that cladding is in on the buildings there beneath the brickwork. The steps are in. There's still a bit of construction hoarding there now because campus isn't actually fully open yet, but it is genuinely looking like what we've shown there on the CGI. And then Little David Street that sits in between the 2 old warehouses. We've kept all, as you can see on this sort of the CGI on the right, we've kept things like the fire escape, reconditioned it, made it safe, and they become like little gardens for some of the apartments above. We've kept the pulleys, we've kept all these weird and wonderful windows and arches where we can. And the idea really is this becomes one of the main quite small entrances into that central garden area. And it's almost like when you're in those beautiful cities abroad in Europe and you stumble across, you go down like a little sort of alleyway and you stumble across this amazing square or amazing garden in the middle. That's kind of what we're trying to create at campus with these 4 little fairly narrow routes in, rather than have great big roads into the middle of the site, if you like. But it's very easy to do things on CGIs, of course. it's actually much harder to do it in practice because you've got pressures from funds, from banks, from contractors who obviously want to make it easier to build. You've got, you know, not everyone shares your vision really that you want to put sort of huge, you know, landscaped trees and things like that in there. So I just wanted to show you all the rest of the pictures here now are all real pictures for what it's actually looking like now on the run up to when we actually open this thing properly in the spring of 2021. Excuse me. So you can see on the picture on the left, I do think campus is really kind of getting its soul back now. So we've cleaned up that old decrepit building, and that's currently being fitted out with kitchens and things for the apartments, and all the flooring's going in there. But you can start to see, really, it's starting to get a bit of soul. It's got this beautiful frontage onto the Rochdale Canal, which shows a very warm brick for the new build, just to try and, which is very sort of Manchester-like rather than covered in cladding or kind of glass and steel, which can be a little bit soulless. And we've also got these sort of concrete columns, which are a little bit of a reflection of what was there with these 1960s colonnades. And we're very much hoping ivy and other plants are going to grow up those really to try and get this really overgrown look. The picture on the right was taken in August of this year, so only a couple of months old. And you can see the kind of quality of and the density of the planting that we've done. So we've got giant tree ferns, we've got these palm trees in there, very, very dense planting down at sort of ground floor level, and multi-stem plants in there as well, because for us it was just about creating this completely unique garden right in the middle of a city centre setting. These pictures are quite old. These pictures were taken the week we mainly finished the landscaping, which was actually November last year, because even though residents aren't going to move in till the spring, we wanted a good sort of 12, 18 months for the landscaping to really take and to really grow in there. But you can just sort of see what we're trying to do. We're trying to make it very earthy, very warm, very kind of natural. And finally, an image on the left, which is what it did look like when you were on the other side of the canal. There was a wall separating the site to the waterway, which we've now taken down. It was a sea of car parking and NCP car parking. You can see the funny little 60s security hut there on stilts. And then if you look at the image on the right, which was taken again in August of this year, it's completely changed, but the essence of what was there, we have very much tried to keep by keeping that old security cabin there. Hopefully in sort of March, April time, we'll start to get about 700 or 800 people who will actually be living in campus. And of course, we'll have about 19 or 20 bars, restaurants, independent retail. That's all going to be around that courtyard. So it's going to be a vibrant space, a really interesting space. But the bungalow itself, or rather the security hut, which we call the bungalow, that is going to be our little village hall is the intention. So we want that space to be available for use, not just for people in campus where it can be a little pop-up bar or a pop-up restaurant for a few months. We also want it to be a place that's capable of being used by people outside of campus. So if you're in the gay village to the north, or if you're in Chinatown, you can come and use the space as your village hall. You can come and use it on a Tuesday morning to have meetings. People might want to come and use it and rent it for a month to be a pop-up art gallery. So it's got all sorts of different uses to really get the wider community back into this previously locked off area of the city. And that is campus. Thank you very much.
Thanks very much, Adam. Perfect, right to time. I'm going to invite you to stop sharing your screen and the judges will join us on video. Great. Yeah, I'm going to kick off with the first question, Adam, because I am the conduit for Tom Bloxham from Urban Splash, who visited your project. Due to COVID, some of us struggled to get in a visit, so he's kindly do that. One of the things that he remarked on was that it really did feel like Manchester, and about these spaces that have been opened up, which had been closed to the public for some time. But I guess my question on that note is, how did that choosing what to retain and choosing what to remodel and choosing what to let go of is always a very delicate process of decision making. So perhaps did you have some guiding tenets, or was it retain if at all possible, or was it what were some of the kind of guiding principles, if you will, to retention, remodeling, refurbishment?
It was really, and which is something we try and do as a company, it was really trying to retain what we could and what we could usefully use. There were a couple of buildings that we did have to demolish just because they'd been built very specifically for specific sort of reasons, and when you looked into it, it was just impossible to kind of convert them into anything else really, just because of the structures that were in them. But we felt that 60s tower, you'd never build that again, because from an efficiency point of view, it's hopeless. You know, the gross to net is absolutely terrible. It's got a massive cause in the middle. But actually, once it's there, in a way, you might as well make use of that rather than rebuild it with tiny little cores that perhaps people would do nowadays and tiny little narrow corridors. You might as well really keep that building. And actually, to some extent, people used to demolish all the old mills that made, you know, Manchester and places famous, because they were these old, grim, old red brick things that were from yesteryear, and it, you know, it was a sign of sort of, you know, poverty and things in the past. But actually, and a lot of them did go, but what's left is absolutely celebrated now. And to some extent, I think that's kind of happening with 60s architecture, you know, in Manchester, and some of those sort of old polytechnic type buildings that you get around university buildings. So I can't help but thinking in years to come, and it's kind of happening now, I think, people are going to sort of celebrate some of this brutalist architecture as well, because it's something that, you know, post-war was very, very important part of rebuilding Britain. So we decided very quickly we wanted to try and keep that building if we possibly could. The complications are, of course, there's no drawings, you don't have any plans, you don't know how deep the foundations are. So it's a lot harder to do, but I'm really glad we have, because otherwise I think we'd end up with a much more homogeneous scheme of pretty much all new build, which is what we wanted to try and avoid, really.
Certainly, brutalism is very celebrated at the moment. I'm going to bring in Catherine, who's going to have more expertise than me.
And hi, Adam. And I'm not going to go there because I love brutalist architecture. So, Adam, we're focusing on the spaces between buildings, and it's a very tight site, as you say. There's very little space kind of on the ground between the buildings, and we know that Manchester lacks green space, and we saw in lockdown that people in apartments were just searching for places to go and sit. So how is it going to be clear that this is a public space for anybody to use and not just for the residents of your scheme?
I think it will naturally do that anyway, because we've got the bars and restaurants that all go round effectively the garden, because there's the main garden that we talked about. There's another one at the back on Chiltern Street. You'll probably know, Catherine, being sort of local at the back. So and they've all got active frontages opening up onto them. So hopefully it's going to be fairly obvious that you can go out there, and all those bars and restaurants are going to have their own sort of areas that then spill into that space. So you can have chairs and tables outside. But we also want to try and just encourage people to be able to use it. So if you're working Piccadilly Place next door, you know, Berkeley Garden or something, and you want to just go and get some fresh air while you eat your sandwich, you can come and sit on one of those benches within the middle. So there's no gates on it. There's no doors of entry. It's open 24/7. So anybody can walk through it any time of the day or the night. Because I think if the minute we sort of put gates and things on it, and you say, okay, it's shut from 1 in, I think then you do start to have that problem that people don't feel like it's their space. And we want it to feel like it's part of the city, and it's owned by the city, not owned by, you know, a private development company who don't really want you there, is the idea.
Julian, I'm going to ping over to you, another private development company with some public spaces.
Adam, thank you very much for the great presentation. I'll confess I'm a guilty watcher of Mantopia, so it's nice to meet the other famous person behind the business as well.
Not quite famous anymore.
Interesting. I mean, it is this sort of classic thing, isn't it? Is that unlocking this sort of potential which has been trapped up in a university campus. And a few years back, I used to work for Terry Farrell and Partners, and remember doing all the kind of master planning for the university. So on the one hand, it's great to see these places getting unlocked. And I think, you know, this approach with this very intense, lush garden, you know, it probably is, you know, it's a great way of doing it. And everything you've said about the early scheme planting, so that plants have 12 to 18 months to bed on. I mean, it's all really good stuff. I guess again, you know, it's interesting probably to explain the project well. You know, it's those sort of slightly wider connections, isn't it? Because there are green spaces and formal squares and garden squares around there, and there's the expanse of the waterscape at the canal side. And so probably, you know, I'm trying to almost sort of help you out here. It's probably that you're offering a variety of different spaces and places, not only within the public realm that you're creating, but also in the variety of the buildings you're creating as well. So I don't kind of really have a question as such, but I just think it's probably about, again, it's explaining it in its urban setting is something that may help the presentation of the overall scheme.
I think so. We've got, so that's obviously the main garden. We've loosely called it Chorlton Square at the back. We haven't sort of finalised the name yet because it's not quite finished. It's still the kind of compound. As the contractors are starting to kind of move out the site now, as the buildings are starting to finish, we're kind of revealing different areas. But there's also a sort of podium level area for residents, which is above part of the site, so it's kind of second floor level, which at one stage felt like a really important part of it. But the more we've got into it, the more we've decided not to invest too much in that bit actually, and invest really down at the ground floor where it's open for everybody. So we kind of reallocated some of the budget, funnily enough, from what was going to be private space to what is that public space, because it seemed important that we buy bigger species of plants and better plants, because it's as I said on the presentation, they're great these when you look at them at CGIs, but then often when you look at these schemes in reality, the trees are like saplings with a little stick on, aren't they? And we just didn't want that at all. We just wanted it to kind of have that immediate kind of hit when you walk in. Partly because I think it's the right thing to do and make it a nice place to live, but also we want it to be successful and sustainable from a kind of business perspective. And if we could put the money into that main area, we'll hopefully then attract better bars, restaurants, independent retail type companies around there as well, because it'll be a massive shame, and it won't happen, by the way, because you'll be able to, well, this has been recorded so you can prove it, but that scheme will not be successful if it attracts like the likes of Subway or Pizza Express, because it's just like every other scheme then. It needs to be attracting independent type offers in there to make it different, and I think that's the way the world is going a little bit now anyway, and I think Campus will be right at the front of that in Manchester.
Frances, can I bring you in?
Hi. I think the intensity and the lushness and the density that both the CGIs and then the completed photos show is just really characterful and different. And because I haven't been able to visit, I wonder if there are also places where you can kind of get a breather and you can get a distant view, and maybe it's a bit calmer and there's a sort of a peaceful, a different experience. Are there any places amongst all those collection of very different buildings where there's a different character?
Where I showed the picture, which had the kind of gates, is on the left, had the sort of the 1960s gates. There's actually 3 sort of semi-mature beech trees there that I guess they're sort of 40 years old or so. I don't really know, but they're that kind of age. And we've kept all those, as we've kept those three trees there, because that's a much little calmer space, which kind of faces onto the fire station site, London Road Fire Station, which is a site that's going to be coming forward in the near future, which is an amazing listed building. So that's a nice little space that's sort of just outside. So that doesn't really have the same kind of bars and restaurants kind of opening up onto it, but it's a nice little space from those trees. But what's amazing about the process, even just keeping those trees was incredibly difficult, because there's almost like a natural assumption in our country by everybody, well, you have to get rid of them, you'll have problems with the roots, or you can't keep them. And you don't want trees in there because it's a maintenance liability. So you really want to have concrete or granite sets. It's almost, I can't help but thinking landscape architects are almost conditioned when they go to university to kind of clear everything out and have big spaces. But funnily enough, I think they're often nicer when it does create these sort of intimate spaces. And even though, I don't know how, because I know the scheme so well, but that central garden area isn't that big in reality. Because even though it's a 2.5 acre site, there are a lot of buildings on it. And I do think it has this nice sort of smallish, almost like village feel about it itself, which I think works quite well.
So that brings this session to a close. So I just want to say thank you very much, Adam. I'm going to say goodbye to you now. And in fact, we're all going to say goodbye because the judges are going to go and make their deliberations on this category. I want to say a huge thank you to you all. I know you visited all of these places have been visited. So that's, given the current circumstances, I know that was a testament to your dedication to making a really great deliberation today. So the results of their labors will be made visible when we present the Golden Pineapples on the 13th of November from 3:30 to 4:30. So I hope to see you there. And thanks again to all our presenters today, to the Design Council for their support. And I'll see you in the social lounge, but for now it's goodbye from us here